Thanks very much for the opportunity of presenting today. My name is Oliver Bathe. I'm founder and CEO of QualisureDx. So over the last 25 years of my practice as a cancer surgeon, I can't tell you how many times we've administered these really toxic treatments to individuals who are already sick from their cancer, and we don't even know whether they're going to benefit. When you look at a cancer under a microscope, it might have a relatively generic appearance to it, but what you can't tell under the microscope is how quickly it's going to grow, its capacity to spread to other parts of the body, and its susceptibility to various treatments. And so oncologists have a lot of difficulty in deriving a treatment plan. As a result, billions are wasted on the wrong therapy on the wrong patients. So we've developed a platform for personalization of cancer care, and there are really three elements to this. The first element is a machine learning algorithm, which we call HiLifer, which scours very large genomic databases to identify the molecular features of a cancer that are most closely related to survival outcomes. We have a good understanding of unmet clinical needs, and so we focus on those. And finally, as a third element, we have a cloud-based engine, which we call Molecular Decoder, which houses all of our diagnostic algorithms and produces test reports really rapidly. So our initial focus was to develop a test on thyroid cancer. And the reason for this is that the incidence of thyroid cancer is increasing very significantly by more than 6% per year. What's also really unique about this tumor is that it's not life-threatening most of the time, yet we treat it very aggressively. And so there's an unmet clinical need to develop a test that more appropriately directs care for these patients. So HiLifer was used to identify 82 genes that were most closely associated with survival or recurrence of thyroid cancer after surgery. And the pattern of expression of genes helps us to really easily identify high-risk patients who have a high risk of recurrence, as well as patients who have low risk and intermediate risk of recurrence. So what you see here is what's called a Kaplan-Meier curve, and it goes downwards every time that somebody in the cohort gets a recurrence event after surgery. And you can tell that groups of people who are categorized as low risk, intermediate risk, and high risk are really easily discriminated. And what you see here is the recurrence rate of the current standard of care, which is something called the American Thyroid Association Clinical Risk Score. And it's not very accurate, but our test, Thyroid Guide PX, is much more accurate. So the question is, how does this affect clinical care? And here's what typically happens. After the diagnosis of thyroid cancer, usually what happens is individuals undergo surgery almost immediately. And only after that surgery can the clinician assemble all of the important information to estimate the likelihood that the cancer is going to come back. But by that point, the patient's already experienced the impact of surgery, and they may even require a second surgery. We're going to change all of that. Thyroid Guide PX is something that can be applied prior to the surgery so that it can inform the surgeon on the best surgical approach for that individual. We've put this through third-party health economic evaluation, and I'm pleased to say that this is something that's cost-effective in both the Canadian and the US systems. There's no other test like this on the market. There are a few other thyroid tests that are based also on needle biopsies, but the intent of those tests are completely different. And really what they're built to do is really distinguish benign from cancer nodules. In comparison to the current standard of care, this is much more accurate, and most importantly, it's something that can be done prior to any treatment. We hope to launch this in January of 2022, and we'll be doing that through our two central labs in Orlando, Florida, and in Calgary, Alberta. This is the general model that's utilized by the vast majority of diagnostic companies. But eventually what we want to do is decentralize testing. So that's having the testing done in labs that are more closely situated by the hospitals where patients are receiving their care. The molecular information that's produced by our next generation sequencing is just uploaded to Molecular Decoder, and Molecular Decoder delivers a test result within seconds back to the ordering hospital. This is a schematic of Molecular Decoder, and essentially this can be utilized anywhere in the world. And the testing, therefore, can be done anywhere in the world. And the raw molecular information is just simply uploaded. And molecular decoder houses all of these different diagnostic algorithms and produces test reports that are specific to that test. We envision eventually that this is going to be a single hub for precision oncology tests as we build onto this. And importantly, it's a very significant data asset. This is our team. We have a very diverse team in terms of complementary expertise. And together we've engaged 10 thyroid surgeons from the US and Canada and around the world. We've received awards for our innovation. We're working closely with Boston Healthcare as well as our 2 partner labs to bring this to the market by the first quarter of 2022. We have a good understanding of the regulatory pathway, but in the meanwhile, we'll be marketing this as a laboratory developed test so that we can hit the ground running. We think that we can acquire 20% market share by 2026, which coincides with a revenue of over $30 million. This may seem quite unbelievable, but when you compare this to the sales trajectory of Oncotype DX, which is a very similar test for breast cancer, they were able to acquire 20% market penetration by 4 years. And of course, now the precision oncology market is booming. Shortly after introduction to the US, we hope to disseminate this globally. We have 4 additional tests that we're currently putting through validation, and they all have significant revenue potential as well. We've raised $600,000 in grants. We're in the midst of a $2 million raise now, and that will be used for scaling once we launch. And subsequent to that, we'll be raising money for further scaling, but also to engage pharma companies so that we can develop further tests that will help to guide chemotherapy decisions. The investment is based on a simple agreement for equity, and it's based on a post-money valuation cap of $10 million. And a conversion discount to 25%. And I've personally invested under the same terms of this SAFE agreement. Thank you very much for your attention. At this point, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Oliver. That was a great presentation. Any questions from the floor before we get started?
While people are thinking, just wondering if you have any therapeutics that you're already starting to align with your diagnostics, either here locally or with partners, because you could probably increase the value of your proposition significantly that way.
Yeah, so the thing about the thyroid test is that it really helps to make surgical decisions, and surgery is really the predominant treatment modality for that particular cancer. And similarly for the head and neck test and the lung cancer test and the colorectal test, these are all meant for surgical decisions. Now, having said that, we have seen that the high-risk thyroid cancer seems to have some indication that it's sensitive to a new type of drug called EZH2 inhibitors and also immunotherapy. So we think that potentially this could be something that could be used for theranostics as well, something to help make decisions related to chemotherapy. We're going to be using the very same model with chemotherapy cohorts. So our goal is to eventually engage with pharma, cooperate with them, and co-develop tests that help specifically identify individuals who are not going to experience a benefit from their chemotherapy.
Thank you. Waiting for more questions, but if no one's going to ask, then I might keep on going. It's sometimes tough to protect biomarker IP. How bulletproof is your IP? Do you need any advice on legal, on patent advice, that kind of thing, or do you feel it's pretty secure? You might not want to answer that directly, but we do have great lawyers in our community here, and just wondering if there's anything that we can do to help on that side in terms of protecting the IP that you've already spent money trying to patent, should it come to a challenge.
Yeah, thanks very much. We have actually an entire IP strategy. High Lifer is going to remain a trade secret. That's the machine learning algorithm. Molecular decoder and the biomarkers are subjects of patents. We've submitted a US patent initially about a year ago for the thyroid test, and recently submitted a PCT international patent for that. It doesn't seem like it's likely that that's going to be challenged in a very significant way because there's lots of precedent, including Oncotype DX, for example. Our general approach is prepare the publication first, have the patent ready prior to publication so that we can extend the lifetime of the patent.
Great, thanks. Maybe
I guess
John has
I'll
a
jump in
question?
just to jump in with one other question here. So Oliver, in terms of your molecular decoder hub, the scalable digital platform, mentioned that's in the works. When do you anticipate, or when are you hoping that that might be ready to launch, like in 2023 or a later point?
In 6 weeks.
6 weeks. Okay, great.
We're down to the wire. We're working really hard to solve all the technical problems, but we're hoping to finish by the end of October.
Excellent. That's great.
We'll continue to do, as you can imagine, it's one of those things that's going to require multiple iterations to make it the perfect thing, but the MVP will be ready to go and connect to the 2 partner labs by that time.
Great, perfect. And you mentioned on your second last slide that you're doing $10,000 minimum safe investment. How much are you looking to raise in total in this round?
2 million. We've raised just over 600,000.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions from the group?
We have a bit of extra time, I think, because I'm waiting for Amir Nazad. Is he in from QualisureDx? Oh, I'm not sure if he's made it in. I tried to call him, but so we have, I guess, until about 3 o'clock. Is that right? We have a little break also scheduled, so we are ahead of time, which is great. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask Oliver. Otherwise, we can always take a little break if you wish, but there's a lot of meat on this proposal. I think it's a great presentation as well, Oliver. And you've got your team here. Do you want to introduce the other people on your team?
Yeah, so we have Brandon Freet, who's our Chief Financial Officer. He's got excellent control of our expenditure, and any questions you want to ask of him related to the books or our business plan, he's happy to answer.
Welcome, Brandon. Thanks. Did you want to have any input onto the discussion or take questions on anything in particular today?
So I'm happy to take any questions that anyone would have. Yeah, please.
How long have you been with the
have
company?
one question from John Porter. John, is your mic working now? Test. I don't hear anything. I can ask your question. John's asking for the primary jurisdiction for commercialization. Either to Brandon or Oliver.
Sure. So we actually just completed working with the Canadian Technology Accelerator, and that's basically a program run by the Canadian Consulate to help us to introduce us to the US market. I anticipate that probably our partner lab in Orlando, which is called Protean Biodiagnostics, is probably going to be the first to the line in terms of being able to sell this. We'll initially sell this probably to private payers mostly for the first 6 months, and our hope is to have a billing code by June, and at that point we can engage with health insurers. In the meanwhile, we'll try to get things off the mark here in Canada through our Calgary lab, OncoHelix. But our big focus is really going to be down the US initially, because they tend to be very early adopters for this precision oncology type testing.
Great, thank you very much. Oh, John looks like he has one more question, but I don't think, I at least cannot hear your microphone. John, if you wanted to type that, please go ahead.
Maybe while you're working on that, Oliver, you're, I guess, expanding laterally into other forms of cancer. How can you manage that? It must be a pretty large operation. Do you see yourself continuing to expand laterally into other tests, or really focus on getting 1 or 2 tests out, geographically getting as much market as possible?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and we're grappling with that. Clearly, we need to get our first product all the way down to the finish line. We need to get experience understanding how to engage with thyroid surgeon community. And whatever we learn from that, including the regulatory stuff, we'll be applying to the other tests. But in the meanwhile, we've been working with interns that are helping us to refine the other tests, so they're ready to go once we have the sufficient manpower, as well as other resources to focus on those. But really, thyroid has to be our first focus.
Terrific.
And just on that note, Oliver, of the cancers you've mentioned that that are potential targets, what is there one that is the most closely related to thyroid in terms of its the tendency for surgeons to operate despite the non-lethality of it?
Yeah, so head and neck is probably going to be our next priority. The main reason for that is that the surgeons actually asked us for that, which means there's a very significant clinical need. The problem with head and neck surgery is that it's really morbid surgery and morbid treatments such as radiations. So if you can find a way to de-escalate the treatment, that has a really significant effect on patients' quality of life. And the other good thing about those two types of tumors is that they're niche tumors. So you have a very defined group of clinicians that are taking care of those patients. So you can engage with that community much more meaningfully as opposed to breast cancer, which of course is which is more important from a population standpoint, but it's much harder to engage with that community and get a foothold in that market. So that's the reason that we're going to approach those ones first. Lung is another one that clinicians have asked us about, and again, it really depends on resources and also depends on the competitive landscape in terms of when we're going to put a lot of effort into those things.